One night in June 1988, a 22-year-old guy went out to run a quick errand in Los Angeles, California, but he never came back home. The person who did this wouldn't be found until many, many years later, and when they did find out who it was, everyone was shocked. Matthew Chase was born in 1965 in Los Angeles and grew up in sunny Southern California. He was the youngest of 3 kids in a family that split up when he was little because his parents got divorced. Matthew went to regular public schools in Los Angeles. He finished high school at John Burroughs High School in Burbank. After graduating, he really loved being creative, so he went to community college in Los Angeles where he studied photography and art. When Matthew was 22 years old, he was starting to build a really good life for himself. He had a job at a computer services company in Burbank. Matthew lived in an apartment with 2 really close friends who weren't just roommates to him. They were like family to each other. On June 8, 1988, Matthew borrowed his roommate's car to do some quick shopping. One thing he needed to do was pick up cat food, which should have only taken about 15 minutes. That evening, he drove to Vermont Avenue near Los Feliz Boulevard because he needed to get some cash from a Bank of America ATM machine. The ATM was in a small parking lot at a strip mall that didn't have very good lighting. It was a quiet spot that seemed totally normal, but it would end up being the last place anyone saw him alive. When Matthew didn't come home when he was supposed to, his roommates started to worry. Hours went by and they didn't hear anything from him, and they got really scared. Moving fast, one of his roommates called the bank and pretended to be Matthew so he could find out what was happening with his bank account. What he found out was really scary and wrong. Matthew's ATM card had been used over and over again that night. The bank records showed that at first, there was a normal transaction where someone put money in and took cash out. Then there were several more tries to use the card, including one attempt to take out $280, which was more than you're allowed to take out in one day. Knowing that something was very, very wrong, the roommate called the police right away and told them Matthew was missing. The detectives started looking for Matthew and got the video footage from the ATM camera. The video showed something really creepy. During the times when the card was being used, there was a man standing really close behind Matthew, almost over his shoulder. The way the man stood and moved made it look like he was controlling Matthew or scaring him. The stranger was shorter and more built than Matthew, and the video made the police think that Matthew might have been kidnapped at the ATM or right after. When they looked deeper, they found out that Matthew's card was used again later that same night at a different Bank of America bank. This time, a hidden security camera caught the same man trying to use the card multiple times. The attempts didn't work and the machine actually kept the card. When the police checked the card later, they couldn't find any fingerprints that would help them. It looked like someone had wiped it clean or used gloves when touching it, which made the police even more sure that someone had planned to hurt Matthew and was trying not to get caught. A few weeks later, on June 27th, the car Matthew had been driving was found left behind, not too far from where he disappeared. When the detectives looked inside, they didn't find any fingerprints or anything that showed there had been a fight. The only clue was a blue bandana that didn't belong to Matthew or his roommates. Then, on September 17th, almost 3 months after Matthew disappeared, someone found human remains in a ravine in Pasadena. It wasn't until March 29, 1989, that dental records proved that the remains were Matthew Chase. The doctors figured out that he died from being shot with a gun. The police decided that Matthew had probably been kidnapped, robbed, and killed within just a few hours of the ATM incident. While it looked like the person wanted to steal his money, some detectives thought that maybe Matthew was killed so he couldn't tell anyone what happened. Even though they had lots of clues and did a really big investigation, nobody was ever arrested, and they never figured out who hurt Matthew. In 2018, after 30 years of having no answers, the detectives called Matthew's family with news they had been waiting a really long time to hear. They told his mom that the case had been officially solved. Based on what they found, the person who was responsible for what happened to Matthew was a 20-year-old guy who they thought was in a gang. His name was David Bear Massey. For years, Massey's name had come up in rumors and secret tips, but it was only much later that the detectives found enough proof to close the case and be sure about it. In a really sad twist that's almost hard to believe, Massey himself never had to go to court or go to jail. On the night of June 10, 1988, less than 2 days after Matthew went missing, Massey was shot and killed in a drive-by shooting on a street corner in the Rampart area of Los Angeles. The police report said that he was probably killed because of gang violence, which means that maybe the people in his own gang turned against him. His death suddenly ended any chance for him to confess or go on trial, so the detectives had to figure out the truth by looking at evidence and talking to witnesses. When the detectives looked at the case again years later, they looked at the surveillance photos from the bank's hidden cameras one more time. When they showed the pictures to Massey's girlfriend, She right away said it was him, as the man standing close to Matthew during the ATM transactions. What she said gave the police the important connection they needed to be sure he was involved. The fact that Massey looked like the man in the video, plus the timing of when he died and other clues, made the detectives sure that Massey was the one who kidnapped Matthew and killed him. The detectives thought that Massey had come up to Matthew, either pretending to help him or threatening him, making him take out cash before probably killing him, so Matthew couldn't identify him later. Even though they weren't completely sure if other people helped Massey, the police were confident that Massey was the main person who did the crime. While detectives couldn't say for sure that nobody else was involved, they didn't find any solid proof connecting any other suspects. Because of the law and the rules, the Los Angeles Police Department said the case was cleared by exceptional means, which means they figured out who did it but couldn't arrest them or put them on trial. For Matthew's family and friends, the news made them feel different things all at once. After years of being hurt, hearing rumors, and not knowing what happened, they finally had a name and a clearer understanding of what happened. In July 1957, the streets of Los Angeles were torn apart by gunfire. Using modern fingerprint and DNA technology, and because investigators never gave up trying for many generations, the person who did it was finally uncovered and brought to justice. Richard Phillips was born in 1928 in Los Angeles, California. By the time he was 28 years old, he had already built a life based on discipline and helping others. Before he became a police officer, Richard proudly served in the U.S. Navy. After his time in the military, he settled down, got married, and became a loving family man who cared deeply about his wife and kids. His love for both his family and his community led him to join the El Segundo Police Department in 1955, which was the start of his career in helping the public. Milton Curtis was born 4 years after Richard in 1932, also in Los Angeles. He grew up in the South Bay area where he went to local schools and people knew him because he was really active in sports and youth programs in the community. Just like Richard, Milton wanted to serve his country, so he joined the U.S. Marine Corps. After he got an honorable discharge, he wanted to keep helping people, so he joined the El Segundo Police Department in 1956. At just 25 years old, Milton was already respected by the people he worked with because he was so enthusiastic and dedicated. He had gotten married when he was young and had built a loving home with his wife and children, who he loved more than anything. Going from being a Marine to being a police officer came naturally to him. On July 22, 1957, at around 1:00 in the morning, officers Milton and Richard were driving around on a regular patrol through the streets of Los Angeles. The night had been quiet and nothing had happened until they saw a car run a red light at Rosecrans Avenue. Thinking it was just a small traffic violation, they decided to pull the car over for a standard stop. Officer Milton walked up to the driver's side of the car to talk to the driver, while Officer Richard stayed near the patrol car, using the radio to call in the car's license plate number to the dispatcher. What seemed like a normal traffic stop suddenly became serious when the dispatcher called back saying that the car had been reported stolen and might be connected to an earlier robbery and assault. While the officers were waiting to get more information, the situation took a deadly turn. Without any warning, the suspect jumped out of the car with a revolver in his hand. Before either officer could do anything, he started shooting at close range. The night filled with gunfire and chaos. Officer Milton was hit by bullets 3 times and fell down near the front of the patrol car. Officer Richard, even though he was badly hurt, managed to shoot back and hit the suspect in the shoulder or back before he fell down near the back of the car. A few moments later, everything went silent on the street. When the dispatcher tried to contact the patrol unit again, nobody answered. Within minutes, another patrol unit nearby was sent to go check on the officer's location. When the backup officers got there, they found a really scary scene. The El Segundo patrol car was still parked on the side of the road with its engine still running, headlights shining through the dark, and the red spotlight still pointed at the stopped car. In front of it was the stolen car with its driver's door wide open. The officers immediately knew something was terribly wrong. Officer Milton was found lying on the ground near the front of the patrol car. He had been shot 3 times. 1 bullet wound to his chest had killed him. Officer Richard was found a few feet away near the back of the car, also shot 3 times. His police gun had been fired once, which showed that he had tried to protect himself and his partner even though he was badly injured and dying. Blood marks and signs that he had moved showed that Richard had tried to reach the radio or find cover after being shot, showing how determined he was to fight until the very end. Paramedics and more officers got there quickly, but they couldn't save them. Both officers were pronounced dead at the scene. Sadness and shock spread quickly through the police department as the area was closed off. police from neighboring cities, including El Segundo, Manhattan Beach, and the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department all joined together in a huge search for the person who did this. Patrol cars searched nearby neighborhoods while helicopters looked from up in the sky, but the person who did it had disappeared without a trace. As the investigation went on, they found spent .38 caliber bullet casings at the scene. The stolen Ford car had some partial fingerprints on the steering wheel and door handle, which only gave them a few clues. Both officers' guns were found, and each one showed signs of being fired. Even with the big search, there was no sign of the suspect. With very little physical evidence and no quick leads, the investigation eventually stopped moving forward. Even though they offered rewards and police worked really hard for years, the case went cold. In September 2002, a false lead unexpectedly brought new life into a case that had been cold for almost 50 years. The investigators looked at the evidence from the 1957 case again, carefully looking at every piece of information that had once led to dead ends. During this new examination, they decided to run the fingerprints found in the stolen car through the FBI's National Fingerprint Database again, which was a tool that didn't exist when they first investigated. To their surprise, the results showed a match. The prints belonged to Gerald F. Mason, a man who had been arrested for burglary in South Carolina back in 1956, just a year before the crimes happened. This discovery changed everything. The detectives started tracking where Mason was, and soon found him living quietly in Columbia, South Carolina. On a January morning in 2003, federal and local police moved in and arrested the 70-year-old man at his home without any problems. His neighbors were shocked. The elderly man they knew as friendly and quiet was being accused of killing 2 police officers almost 50 years earlier. More investigation confirmed that the evidence left behind in 1957 pointed directly to Mason. Handwriting experts looked at samples from his past and found they matched entries in a YMCA guestbook from California, where Mason had once signed in using a fake name. DNA evidence also connected him to the crime using samples taken from him after his arrest. In March 2003, Mason appeared in a Los Angeles County courtroom to face the charges. There he said he was guilty of both killings, taking responsibility after decades of staying quiet. In Hawthorne, California, Mason came upon 4 teenagers at a local lover's lane, which is a place where couples go to be alone. Pulling out his gun, Mason forced the 2 couples to take off their clothes down to their underwear and tied them up and blindfolded them. He then sexually assaulted one of the girls, leaving the teens alive but traumatized. Mason then drove away in their 1949 Ford car, ran a red light, and was pulled over by officers Richard and Milton. Mason later said, "I thought if I don't get them, they are going to get me. So when the officer turned away from me, I shot both officers, got back in the car, and drove away." When they asked him why he had sexually assaulted a 15-year-old girl, Mason said that he didn't remember anymore. For the next 46 years, Mason was a law-abiding citizen who followed all the rules. He owned 7 gas stations, got married, and raised a family. He was later described by friends and neighbors as friendly and helpful. During sentencing, Mason broke down crying and said a tearful apology to the families of the officers, saying he understood the pain and loss he had caused. He said, "It is impossible to tell so many people how sorry I am. I don't understand why I did this. It doesn't fit in my life. It is not the person I know. I hate these crimes." One El Segundo detective said, "He was sorry, but I think he was more sad and more sorry for getting caught." The court sentenced him to 2 life terms in prison, one after the other, making sure he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. For the families of the victims, the moment was both sweet and sad. Justice had finally been served, but it had come after almost 50 years of questions that nobody could answer and grief. The officers' loved ones, along with members of the police community, came to the court proceedings to honor the memory of 2 men who had lost their lives while doing their jobs. The closure brought some peace, but the heaviness of the tragedy was still deeply felt. The widow of Milton said, "I am not his victim anymore. My son is not his victim anymore. I am so grateful even though I had to wait this long. It is worth the wait." Terry, Gerald Mason's daughter, said, "There really aren't words to describe the range of emotions we have gone through." Even so, she insisted, "I could not have had a better father." Mason was denied parole in 2009, which means they said no when he asked to get out of prison. California prosecutors were determined that he would never be released. He stayed in prison until he passed away in January 2017. Looking back on the case, Los Angeles County Sheriff Lee Baca emphasized that while new technology had played a really important role in solving the decades-old case, it was really the fact that generations of investigators never gave up that truly brought Mason to justice. Their determination made sure that even after almost half a century, the sacrifices of officers Richard Phillips and Milton Curtis would never be forgotten. In April 1987, a dismembered female body floated up in the Mayang River of Hunan, China. What started as a murder case ended as one of the most haunting wrongful convictions in modern Chinese history. Shi Xiaorong was from Kaili, a small city in Guizhou province in southwestern China. Her family lived a simple life, relying on the small amount of money they made from their little rice fields. Coming from a farming family that didn't have much money, she grew up in a place where every family member needed to help out. She had several brothers and sisters, and together they shared the jobs of daily work, taking care of the crops and animals that kept them alive. From when she was little, she went to the local village elementary school, but her education was cut short. Like many girls from the countryside back then, she had to leave school early to help her family with housework and farm work. By the mid-1980s, her determination to change her life grew stronger. She made the life-changing decision to leave home. She traveled to other places looking for work, hoping to get a job in a factory or in the service industry in neighboring provinces. But as she started this new chapter, she had no way of knowing what was waiting for her. Her family started to worry when months went by without any word from her. Letters that used to bring her short updates stopped coming, and nobody in the nearby provinces seemed to know where she was. Concern turned into alarm, and her parents, along with her older brother, went to the local police station to report her missing. They described her age, what she looked like, and where she had been planning to go, hoping that someone somewhere might have seen her. The police wrote down the report and tried to send the information to other regions where she might have gone. But in the 1980s, China didn't have a centralized system for missing people or coordination between police in different provinces. Without modern databases or communication networks, following up depended mostly on phone calls, personal contacts, and handwritten reports. For Shi's family, this meant not knowing anything in silence. They could only wait and hope for news that never came. In April 1987, the quiet search took a terrible turn. A dismembered female body was discovered in the Mayang River in Hunan province, a region where she was believed to have traveled. Local police took over the case, and after basic comparisons of appearance and timeline, they said the body belonged to Shi. Soon after, the police arrested Tang Xinshan, a local butcher in Mayang County. He was accused of sexually assaulting, robbing, and killing Shi. The investigators claimed that the two had some kind of relationship or knew each other, though the details of how they supposedly met stayed unclear. The prosecution said that Tang had killed Shi after suspecting her of stealing money from him, and that he then cut up her body to hide the crime. The way the body was cut up was described by investigators as very professional, something they really emphasized in court, because Tang's job as a butcher was said to make him able to do such precise cutting. During the investigation, Tang supposedly confessed to the crime. The authorities said that his confession matched the supposed evidence and the scientific examination of the remains, which they claimed proved his guilt. There was almost no doubt presented during the trial. Once the confession was recorded, the case moved quickly through the legal system. Defense arguments, if there were any, were not written down in detail, and there was very little questioning of how the confession had been gotten. Based on the confession and the prosecution's story, Tang was found guilty. The court gave him a death sentence, saying it was because of how brutal the crime was and how certain they were of his guilt. On January 28, 1989, just 2 years after she disappeared, Tang was executed by firing squad. In a shocking turn of events, almost 20 years later, she reappeared in 2005, alive and well. Her sudden return destroyed what had long been accepted as the truth, that she had been dead since 1987. She revealed that she had been kidnapped and sold into marriage in Shandong province in March 1987, just 1 month before the dismembered body was discovered in Hunan. She had lived in forced isolation for years, far from her hometown, unable to contact her family. When she finally got her freedom and learned about the case, she was horrified to discover that an innocent man had been executed. After she reappeared, she said clearly that she had no connection to Tang and had never met him. She was really upset about what had been done in her name and asked the authorities to fix the miscarriage of justice. Her case quickly got public attention, as what she revealed went against every piece of evidence that had once been used to convict Tang. Shi's return also brought back long-held suspicions among some local people in Guizhou, who had heard faint rumors in the early 1990s that she might still be alive. Her family later confirmed that she had actually returned to her hometown briefly in 1993, years before the truth reached more people. At the time, many found the rumors too hard to believe given the official records. It was only in 2005, when she came forward publicly, that the truth could no longer be ignored. The revelation that she was alive made Tang's children take legal action. They filed a lawsuit at the Hunan Higher People's Court, demanding that the court officially declare their father innocent. For them, the discovery was both sweet and sad. While their father's name could finally be cleared, it couldn't undo the years of shame and loss they had gone through after his execution. The investigators and courts were forced to face the devastating reality that an innocent man had been executed based on a forced confession and wrong identification. The case was looked at again with growing public and legal pressure, as it became clear that fixing the wrongful conviction was both legally and morally necessary. In 2005, the Hunan Higher People's Court officially overturned Tang's conviction, declaring him innocent after his death. His name being cleared came 16 years after his execution. While justice came too late to save him, the ruling was a powerful acknowledgement of the tragedy that had happened, a story of loss, error, and the lasting human cost of wrongful conviction.